So the key takeaway from this video is I just get rid of every single thing I do not need. How's it going, guys? This is a video I've wanted to make for some time now, but finally getting the chance to because I need to make a couple changes to my tune. And by a couple, I literally mean like 2 cells of changes. This video is basically about my methods of tuning and how it differs from a lot of people. Some people ask, well, when I tune cars and stuff, it's because I have my own way of doing it for me, because I like it to suit my own driving style and my own feeling of the car type deal. I like to have as little intervention from the ECU as possible. I just want it to do its job and fire the spark and spray the fuel, and then I'll take care of the rest as the driver type deal, or a mechanic in diagnosing issues or whatever. So anyway, even if you don't tune sub ECUs, you might learn something from this video. So basically, you know, ignition, fuel, or air fuel spark is the basis to any engine running. So tuning is just getting the right amount of fuel for the right amount of air and the spark happening at the right time. So all these numbers and maps and everything is just to achieve that. Because of course it's not mechanical, it's not a distributor and a carburetor. You got to actually map every single condition that the engine might go under. So these are basically the 2 maps that this car runs on. I don't have any idle air control, anything like that, so it doesn't even use the idle fueling map or anything. That's all disabled. It just uses this for idle fueling, this bottom corner, and then this for idle ignition, etc. So before I get more into the actual mapping of things, I'm going to show you the Trionic options, so the firmware settings. So if you don't know what this is basically the on-off switches in the ECU, so you can turn on fuel cut and engine brake, idle control, etc. O2 sensors. So basically, if you notice, I have like everything turned off apart from load control, which is the x-axis in every map from the map sensor basically, so it has to be on. No fuel cut in reverse and first and second, that's still on, but it doesn't even matter because the car doesn't have wheel speed sensors, so the ECU doesn't even know that the car is moving, so this doesn't even matter, it's just checked off. So obviously idle control is completely off because I have no idle air control valve and a hole in the throttle plate, so that's just fixed air. And the way I control idle is actually with ignition timing, and you'll see that in a sec. Air pump control, there's none of that in this car. Knock detection is off on this car because I run MS-109 race gas. So when you have that much octane and your setup is like mine, you'll bend a rod before the car knocks. Like, you'll way exceed the amount of timing that'll cause knock and damage the engine before it even knocks on that fuel. So knock detection is really not important. Some people like to run it, but again, this is my car, I don't run it ever. So purge control, none of that. Temperature correction, this is temperature correction based on IATs. I don't run that. I just like to see when the IATs come up, it gets slightly richer, and then that's that kind of deal. So the car's kind of mapped for one state. Closed loop itself is off as well, so this car just completely runs an open loop, and I'll get to why I do that in a second. Enrichment, acceleration enrichment is on, but I have deceleration and leadment turned off because I don't want it to take away fuel when I come off the throttle. So that's why the car pops some nice flames in between shifts and stuff. But it has to be that way because I have the injectors mounted 6 inches back from the port. So I actually need to keep the whole runner wet with fuel in between shifts, or else I get a stutter on the upshift. So of course, wide open throttle enrichment, so that's when you tip in to 100%, that's that extra fuel. Acceleration enrichment is when you tip in like maybe 60%, or there's any throttle transient. Enrichment after start, yeah, it's Canada, so it's cold sometimes in the morning at race days, so you really need some startup enrichment sometimes. Mobilizers disabled, all of that stuff is gone. And yeah, this is a 20 megahertz ECU. This stuff in the top left doesn't matter. This is just for notes. But yeah, that's basically my settings here. So the first thing I'm going to talk about after this is running no closed loop. So this fuel map right here, all of these cells, this is what the car runs all the time. So there's no closed loop, there's no adaptation, there's no adding a few percent or taking a few percent from the ECU. It's just running fixed fueling. So running open loop when it comes to running the car in boost doesn't really make a difference because these ECUs use a narrowband wideband sensor. So it's basically useless after you get into boost and the car goes a little bit rich because it has no idea what it's seeing. So again, closed loop is meant for driving around the streets off boost. And yeah, you'll notice my off boost section is scaled really small because this car is always in boost. I'm always beating the crap out of it. So it doesn't really need that. So if I did run closed loop, then I'd end up with a whole bunch of weird adaptations happening off boost where I don't need it, and then it's gonna screw up the map in boost. So running just fixed fueling works really well. And again, even if I could run a wideband O2 and have closed loop all the time, so I could just command an air fuel ratio, say at, I don't know, 1.5 bar, I want a specific AFR, and the ECU will always correct for that, whatever the weather. I don't like that stuff because sometimes you have a boost leak, sometimes you have something mechanical going on, and then the ECU starts compensating for something it shouldn't compensate for. I'd rather something go wrong and then I see it in the air fuel ratio on my dash and I know something's wrong, like fuel pressure's too low or whatever it is. Since I'm running race gas, once again, if it goes too lean, it's not really a big issue and the engine is strong, so that helps. But I'd rather just see it on the dash and know something's going on. So again, that's only something you can do when you built the engine yourself, you drive the car yourself, you know how everything feels. You can feel if one cylinder's down a bit, you know what I mean? You actually can just pick up on the mechanical stuff that's going on before someone who doesn't know your car does. So if you were to tune a customer's car like this, for example, it just wouldn't go well because they wouldn't be able to know the car's too lean, too rich, or down on power, or feels different, or, you know, hiccuped a bit. So you really have to know the car to tune your car this way. So if you notice, all the numbers in this fuel map are kind of similar. Like I'm running, it's 0.86. This is just a correction VE factor. This isn't lambda or anything, just so you know. I'm running 0.86 here and 0.86 here. So part of that is because T5 actually adds, even if you make all of these numbers level, T5 will still add injector duration all the way across the board here. So T5 just does that on its own, so it automatically makes the map look flatter. But also I'm running a 5 bar fuel pressure regulator. So my base fuel pressure is 5 bar. So in boost my fuel pressure is like 7 bar. So what that does to the map is fuel pressure is increasing drastically with boost, so I don't have to increase injector duration drastically with boost either. So the numbers just look like this. And that's why the map looks like this. So in the far right column, this is where the car runs when it's past second gear, when it's in third gear. Past 30 pounds of boost. So I actually run a 3 bar map sensor even though I overshoot it, just so it stays in this column and it makes the car run buttery smooth. So on the dyno I've tried 4 bar map sensors, but what happens is the ECU tries to jump in between cells if you're not pinning the map sensor basically. So it just makes the car run a lot better pinning it to the side. Again, that's only something I can do because it's tuned so that I can overshoot boost and it doesn't go too lean. And then as well, the 5 bar fuel pressure regulator helps that. This whole system works with the turbo sizing and the manifolds and everything, the injector sizing, the fuel pressure regulator, all that. It relies on all of those working together basically to make this map function, which makes this tune very specific. So these numbers do follow VE on high boost, but on lower boost, which is second gear, the numbers are pretty basic. It's actually quite rich on lower boost. And then the ignition timing isn't too crazy there as well, because on lower boost, that's what I use in second gear. If you didn't know, I have a switch behind the steering wheel that goes between low and high boost. So low is 1.5 bar ish, so 21 pounds or 22 and a bit. And then high boost is 32 ish, 31 ish. And then I got the overboost button on the front of the wheel that just makes the boost infinite because it's aligned to the top of the gate, but it's a slow leak into the gate, so the boost doesn't just skyrocket. So basically I use that switch on the low setting in second gear to mitigate wheel spin, just so the wheel torque is not too high. And then once I grab third gear, then I'm in high boost, and then once I pull fourth, if I feel like it, I get on the overboost button. The last thing I'm going to say about fueling is air-fuel ratios. Because I run far back injectors, because it's race gas, because of everything with the setup, I actually run 0.90 lambda in high boost all the way up to 0.95 lambda. The car actually touches 1.0 lambda at times, even on the Mosport long back straight. And it's fine because, again, the car has really good fuel vaporization because of the injector location, and I'm running race gas, so you can run it super lean. Based on the data sheet of MS109, the stoic AFR is 13.36, so if we do 13.36 times 0.90 lambda, that's actually a 12:0 air-fuel ratio because the fuel is oxygenated. So by running 1 lambda, it's 13.36, which is just a touch lean, honestly, for that fuel. So again, leaning a car out, or leaning any engine out, I should say, makes more power because, you know, the flame front gets hotter and it burns faster. So at high revs, you really want a fast flame front so you can actually burn all the fuel before the exhaust valve opens, basically. That's what I do for fueling. So again, if all that's not crazy enough, I got more to say. The fuel map, of course, has to work in conjunction with the timing map. So let's just expand this a little bit. I have, again, no knock control. So this is the timing the car runs all the time. And even the warm-up map is identical to this map. So cold start or full bore, it's the same timing map. So again, I run 1.5 bar on low boost. So these columns actually have less advanced than I have on high boost. So I'm running a peak of around 17.5 degrees on low boost, and then a peak of 19 on high boost. And then, yes, this is the map that I ran most recently on the car at Mosport. So this really isn't a lot of timing, even 19 degrees on full boost. But again, I run this column all the way up to 40 pounds of boost. So once it hits 40 pounds, that's where it becomes a lot of timing. But coming into boost, I have the timing reduced to around 15 degrees just because peak VE for this engine is around 5,000 to 6,000 RPM. So if I have a lot of timing in it down low, it's just going to knock the tires loose and it's going to abuse the drivetrain like crazy. There's about 20 foot-pounds of torque pulled out just from reducing timing here. And then, of course, that all comes back as the revs climb up. So the AFRs are leaning out slightly as the revs climb, and the timing is increasing. So that basically keeps the power band flat on this engine. So again, if I had more timing down here, it would result in a big torque spike, and then the car wouldn't fall in its face. It would still make the same power up top, but it would have a lot of torque down low, which would just cause more wheel spin and more havoc on the drivetrain. The car might be faster if the conditions are right and the tires are up to temp and everything, but I just choose to leave it this way. So anything below 5,000 or 4,500 really doesn't matter much on this map because the turbo doesn't spool until here. So again, on low boost, I could be up in the 20s for ignition timing, but I don't run that much because again, it's just going to be too much power for second gear. So I leave it like this. And then coming into boost, I used to run more timing than this as well, but I find that it spools a lot nicer with less timing, just because, more retarded timing, more turbine speed, of course. Off boost has, in the 30s for ignition advance, just if I need to cruise around, so I'm not wasting energy, wasting fuel, and the car just cruises along nicely, and I can cool down the header and whatnot on a cooldown lap. These bottom cells are what's used for idles, so up around 1700 RPM, 6 degrees, and below that 9 degrees. So it kind of bounces in between this point, or finds an equilibrium between this point and idles smoothly. And also in the fuel map, I have kind of a fuel cut when it gets too high in RPM. So again, pulling fuel out makes the idle drop, adding fuel makes the idle come up. So it'll just find an equilibrium point between here, and then that's around 1200 RPM. So, and then that also works in conjunction with the idle target RPM, which is 1100, and then the idle ignition correction. So again, if it gets too high up in idle, pulls some timing out. If it gets too low, then it adds some timing. So it's pretty damn precise without an IAC. Not too complicated there, but again, some trickery involved. So again, you'll notice as well, these maps are scaled to 9000 RPM. So it's not that I'm just keeping this factory 6000 RPM scaling and just clipping that. This whole thing is rescaled, so this is not what it looks like stock. And then again, the x-axis is rescaled, and then of course to the peak of the map sensor, but in small enough increments to where I can have a very, very, very smooth transition coming down into boost. So with that all said, I showed you my timing map. Please respond. No, I'm kidding. This stuff isn't really that much of a secret. You could always run more or less timing depending on the situation of your engine and whatever it may be. So I'm not telling you to run 19 degrees of timing on your sub or whatever it may be. It all depends on your setup. Some terrible setups that flow terribly can run in the 20s. Some good setups can run in the 20s. So it all depends on what you're trying to get from your engine. Speaking of RPM, the way you change the rev limiter is not the way you think. I used to make this mistake in the past. There's a map right here on the side in MISC Basic. It's maximum revolutions per minute. And then basically, normally what I would do, or normally what people do, is just change this number. So right now the limiter is at 8800. But if you change this number, it's not enough to actually change the rev limit. What you have to do is go to, if you haven't already, go to options and settings and enable advanced mode, which is right here. And then you'll end up with more tuning wizards, because without that you'll just have tune me up right here. So yeah, what you'll end up with is change RPM limit, the wizard. So what this does is changes the hard-coded rev limiter and the software rev limiter. So what happens in T5 is the hard-coded rev limiter is actually a soft limiter, which actually pulls ignition timing. And then the software rev limit is the hard fuel cut. So if you change just this over here, the maximum revolutions per minute, RPM max, you'll just be changing the software rev limit and not changing the hard limit. So if you set this at, say, 7000, and then this is still at stock 6200, then it's going to feel like you're floating your valves or something. You're just going to be wondering why the car isn't revving out. The car just will stop revving at 62 because the computer is just pulling timing. So to get your stuff to rev really high, you got to, of course, do some work to the crank sensor and whatnot. But beyond that, you need to have your hard-coded rev limiter set higher than your software rev limit. So there is a way to actually use these effectively in conjunction with each other. You can set them close to each other and make the fuel cut less aggressive, so it's less aggressive on drivetrain. You can actually just use the hard-coded rev limit as your rev limit so it doesn't bounce. So you can kind of like flat shift or do something without hitting a fuel cut. So you can do a lot of things with just these two numbers, which is interesting. But the way the car's set up right now, I choose to have the hard-coded limit out of the way and the software rev limit right there, cutting fuel. so it bounces. Mainly so as a driver I can feel when it's on the rev limit. Other than that, boost control, I do not use it at all in T5 Suite. So again, you know, PID factors, all that, T5 has all that built in. I know I could convert T5 to use a Mac valve and make it run really nice, but I choose not to because I use a Mac valve connected directly to my steering wheel. So it's literally 100% or it's off. So it's a fixed bleed fitting, and I can tell straight away if the weather's different because the boost will look different. So I like it that way. I like to feel everything if you haven't understood that yet. So that's why I run it that way. So all this stuff basically on the side. Adaptation I don't use. Knock sensing I don't use. Diagnostics are off, of course, because I don't need OBD functions. Runtime, this is more of a config type stuff. Car speed calculation, well obviously I don't run that. All that. MISC, you know, all this stuff is config. Idle control, I don't run that. Boost control, I don't run that. So basically it's just ignition control and fuel control, and then of course transient type stuff, so acceleration enrichment, decel, all that. So of course that's specific to your engine and your needs, but the main takeaway from this video is not just me showing you the numbers that I actually run. It's my method of tuning, which is just get rid of all the stuff you don't need. Get rid of the, oh yeah, injector scaling's at 10 because I run 1600 cc injectors, I believe, 1550s at 5 bar base pressure, so that's what the number ends up being. So the key takeaway from this video is I just get rid of every single thing I do not need in the ECU to make it easier to tune, easier to diagnose, easy to drive. If there's something wrong, like there's a leak or whatever, it's down a cylinder because of spark, it's that. It's not that the tune is doing something weird because of something else. Because when I'm at the track, I don't like to think. I like to just drive and feel things. And to me, it actually causes more thinking when the ECU is doing weird things that I don't need it to be doing. It just needs to fire the spark, spray the fuel, and that's all it needs to do. And the air-fuel ratios need to stay between 0.90 lambda and 1.0, and I'm happy, and the car's happy, and everybody's happy. So with that said, I don't expect anyone to be tuning their cars like this, but if I had my own way, I would just be running a distributor and a carburetor and or mechanical fuel injection and be done with it, because I don't like the complexity of too much computation, if that makes sense. That's all I'm trying to say. I like to keep things simple, and thanks for watching.